My name is Ava Chandler, and I'm 32 years old, though I was born and raised amidst the sprawling, sun-drenched vineyards of Sonoma Valley, California, a place synonymous with legacy and a certain kind of old-world ambition that life feels like a distant country now. Portland, Oregon, with its vibrant, rain-kissed streets and fiercely independent spirit, is home. It's here I've carved out a life for myself and my 8-year-old son, Ethan, built around the sizzling heart of my food truck, Ethan's Hearth. This particular Tuesday morning started like any other, a symphony of Portland's unique energy. The air crisp and smelling faintly of damp earth and roasting coffee swirled around me as I artfully arranged microgreens atop a sunrise scramble, one of our best sellers. Laughter from the queue, a playful soundtrack to our morning rush, mingled with the indie folk music drifting from a nearby record store. "Morning, Ava, the usual," called out Mr. Henderson, his weathered farmer's hands gently placing a crate of heirloom tomatoes on my counter. He was one of my first supporters, his organic produce a cornerstone of my menu. I grinned, already reaching for his preferred dark roast from the cart next door. "Coming right up, Mac. And these tomatoes look like sunshine itself." This was my world, a tapestry of familiar faces, shared stories, and the simple joy of creating food that made people happy. Then my phone buzzed, a sharp, intrusive sound against the morning's gentle rhythm. I glanced at the screen, expecting a supplier update or a message from Ethan's school. Instead, an email header stopped me cold regarding the estate of Eleanor Ainsworth. Ainsworth. A name I hadn't allowed to dominate my thoughts for years. My grandmother, the matriarch of Ainsworth Vineyard Estate, a name that commanded respect and no small amount of fear in Sonoma Valley. The casual warmth of the Portland morning seemed to recede, replaced by a familiar chill that had nothing to do with the Oregon air. My smile faltered. The email was brief, formal, and utterly devoid of warmth, much like my memories of Eleanor herself. It was a summons, a polite but firm request for my presence at the reading of her last will and testament to be held at the Ainsworth estate in 3 days. Everything all right, Ava Maria Rodriguez, my closest friend in Portland and the owner of the Blossom and Bean Bakery next to my usual spot, leaned over her brow, furrowed with concern. Her vibrant Mexican pastries were often traded for my savory breakfasts. I forced a tight smile. Just a message from an old-life Maria. Nothing to worry about. But my heart hammered a different tune. Sonoma. The very name conjured a cascade of conflicting emotions, suffocating expectations, the sting of disapproval, and a deep, unacknowledged ache for a connection that had always felt just out of reach. The decision to go wasn't immediate. My first instinct was to delete the email to pretend it never arrived. Portland was my sanctuary, Ethan's hearth, my hard-won independence. Why willingly step back into the lion's den? But then there was Ethan. He knew so little of my family, of that other grander world I'd come from. He deserved to know his heritage, however complicated. And perhaps a tiny, stubborn part of me whispered there was a need for closure, a final definitive line to be drawn under that chapter of my life. "We're going on a little road trip, Munchkin," I told Ethan that evening, ruffling his dark hair as he meticulously built a Lego spaceship, to California, to visit, to see where Mommy grew up. He looked up, his bright, intelligent eyes curious. "With the big grapes, like in the pictures?" "Exactly. With the big grapes." I kept my tone light, an echo of the carefree mother he knew, not the one whose stomach was currently a knot of apprehension. The drive south felt like a journey through time. As the Oregon pines gave way to California oaks and rolling vine-covered hills, memories I'd carefully packed away began to surface. I remembered the imposing grandeur of the Ainsworth estate, a sprawling Spanish-style mansion surrounded by meticulously tended vineyards. It was beautiful, undeniably, but as a child, I'd often found its perfection suffocating. My grandmother Eleanor was the undisputed ruler of that domain. A formidable woman, sharp-witted and sharper-tongued, she had a clear vision for the Ainsworth legacy, and I, her only granddaughter after my mother's early passing, was meant to be a part of it. A polished, Stanford-educated executive ready to take the reins of the wine empire. My dreams of culinary school of creating with my hands were dismissed as youthful folly. and my relationship with Ben Ethan's free-spirited musician father, who had drifted out of our lives almost as quickly as he'd drifted in, had been the final, unforgivable transgression. The for lease sign on my heart from that period had taken years to take down. Pulling up the long, palm-lined driveway of the Ainsworth estate felt like entering a different era. The silence was the first thing that struck me, a heavy, manicured quiet, so unlike the lively hum of Portland. Ethan pressed his face against the window, awestruck by the sheer scale of the place. "Wow, Mommy, it's like a castle." A castle it might have been, but it had never truly felt like home. My Aunt Caroline, my mother's younger sister and the current CEO of Ainsworth Vineyard Estate, greeted us at the massive oak front door. Her smile was perfectly polite, a practiced boardroom affair that didn't quite reach her cool blue eyes. She was the epitome of an Ainsworth impeccably dressed, poised and radiating an air of controlled authority. "Ava. And this must be Ethan," she said, her gaze lingering on my son for a moment, a quick assessment before flicking back to me. "The reading is scheduled for 10 a.m. tomorrow in the library. I trust your journey was uneventful." There was no warmth, no embrace, just a cool professional courtesy that underscored my status as an outsider. We were shown to a guest suite in a wing of the house I barely remembered. It was opulent, filled with antique furniture and heavy brocade curtains, but it felt impersonal cold. That evening, as Ethan, surprisingly resilient, chattered about the grape trees and the giant house, I found myself wandering the formal gardens alone. The meticulously sculpted hedges and roses, perfect in their symmetry, felt like a reflection of the life I'd run from. Beautiful on the surface, but rigid, unyielding. The Sonoma moon, large and luminous, cast long, lonely shadows across the lawns. I wrapped my arms around myself, a shiver tracing its way down my spine, despite the mild California air. Coming back had been the right thing to do, I told myself. For Ethan. For closure. But as I stood there, a solitary figure in the vast, silent grounds of my ancestors, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was a ghost in my own past, an unwelcome echo in a place that no longer held a space for me. Tomorrow would bring the final words of Eleanor Ainsworth, and with it I hoped a final release. The library of the Ainsworth estate was as imposing as I remembered, perhaps even more so now that I viewed it through adult eyes. Sunlight, fractured by the leaded glass of the tall arched windows, struggled to pierce the gloom, landing in muted patches on the Persian rugs, and rows upon rows of leather-bound books that smelled of old paper and polish. A massive mahogany table dominated the center of the room, its surface polished to a mirror sheen reflecting the stern faces of my Ainsworth ancestors, whose portraits lined the dark paneled walls. Ethan, clutching my hand, whispered, "It's like a movie, Mommy." His voice, a small, awed sound in the oppressive silence. I squeezed his hand reassuringly, though my own heart was a frantic bird against my ribs. We found 2 Heppel-white chairs set slightly apart from the main gathering, a subtle but clear indication of our peripheral status, and sat a silent island in a sea of familial tension. Aunt Caroline was already seated at one end of the table, a picture of composed authority in a charcoal gray Chanel suit. Beside her sat my cousins James and Victoria, whom I hadn't seen in years. They offered brief, cool nods in my direction, their expressions carefully neutral, a skill no doubt honed in the competitive environment of the Ainsworth dynasty. The air was thick with unspoken expectations, with the weight of generations. This wasn't just a family gathering, it was a conclave, a passing of a scepter, a reaffirmation of an empire built on grapes and ambition. Mr. Peterson, the family solicitor, a man whose silver hair and somber demeanor seemed as much a fixture of the estate as the ancient oaks outside, cleared his throat. He adjusted his spectacles, the rustle of the parchment in his hands echoing unnaturally in the stillness. "If everyone is present," he began, his voice a dry, precise baritone, "we shall proceed with the reading of the last will and testament of Mrs. Eleanor Ainsworth." My breath caught. This was it. The final judgment, the last word from a woman whose approval I had craved as a child and whose disapproval had ultimately set me free. Mr. Peterson's voice droned on a litany of bequests and trusts. The bulk of the estate, the sprawling vineyards, the winery, the brand that was Ainsworth, All went to Aunt Caroline, solidifying her position as the new matriarch. Generous, though significantly smaller trusts were established for James and Victoria, ensuring their continued comfort and allegiance to the family enterprise. It was all very predictable, very Ainsworth. Then my name. To my granddaughter, Ava Rose Chandler. The room, if possible, grew even quieter. I could feel Ethan shift beside me, sensing the change in atmosphere. Who chose a path divergent from the traditions and expectations of this family? Mr. Peterson continued, his tone unwavering. I leave the contents of the small cedar chest stored in the attic, which belonged to her great-grandmother, Eliza Ainsworth. He paused, then added, and a final disbursement of $10,000 as a last token of familial regard to assist her in her chosen endeavors. A cedar chest from a long-dead relative I barely knew, and $10,000. In the context of the Ainsworth fortune, it was less than a rounding error, a polite dismissal. A final, elegantly worded, "You are not one of us." I saw Aunt Caroline's lips curve into the faintest, almost imperceptible smile. My cousins exchanged knowing glances. The message was clear. I don't know what I had expected. A miracle. A last-minute change of heart. A Hollywood ending where the misunderstood granddaughter was finally recognized. Perhaps a small, foolish part of me had clung to such a hope. The reality, however, was as cold and unyielding as the marble fireplace at the end of the room. Mr. Peterson looked at me over the rim of his glasses. Ms. Chandler. Slowly, I rose. Ethan stood with me, his small hand a warm anchor in mine. I walked to the front of the room where Mr. Peterson indicated a surprisingly small, antique cedar chest and an envelope. My footsteps were the only sound. I picked up the envelope containing the check, then reached for the chest. It was old, the wood darkened with age, its brass fittings dull. It felt unexpectedly heavy, not with monetary value, but with the weight of a forgotten story. I turned to face the room, to face my family. For a fleeting second I saw myself as they must see me. The prodigal, the failure, the one who had walked away from it all for a dream they couldn't comprehend. But then another image superimposed itself me at Ethan's hearth. Sweat on my brow, flour on my apron, surrounded by the happy chatter of customers and the aroma of good food. Ethan by my side. A different kind of legacy, one built not on inheritance but on hard work, passion, and the love of a community that had embraced me when my own blood had not. Thank you, I said, my voice clearer and steadier than I felt. I looked directly at Aunt Caroline. I appreciate the memento from great-grandmother Eliza, and I have always and will continue to find my happiness in my own way. There was no anger in my voice, no bitterness, just a simple statement of fact, a quiet affirmation of my independence. Without another word, Ethan and I turned and walked out of the library, leaving behind the portraits, the polished mahogany, and the suffocating weight of a legacy I no longer desired. As we drove away from the Ainsworth estate, the grand gates receding in the rearview mirror, a wave of something akin to relief washed over me. It was over. The final tie, however tenuous, had been formally, irrevocably severed. Ethan, sensing the shift in my mood, asked, "Are you sad, Mommy?" I reached over and squeezed his knee. A little munchkin. Sad for things that could have been, maybe. But mostly, I glanced at the cedar chest on the seat beside me. I feel free and curious. A memory surfaced, sharp and vivid, from those first terrifying, exhilarating months in Portland after Ben left. I was alone with a 6-month-old Ethan, my culinary school dreams on hold, my savings dwindling. I remembered standing outside a pawn shop, clutching the last piece of jewelry my mother had left me, a delicate gold locket. The $50 I got for it barely covered a week's groceries. The desperation of that moment, the raw fear of not knowing how I would provide for my son, was a stark contrast to the casual dismissal of $10,000 I'd just witnessed. But I also remembered the kindness of a stranger that week, a woman at a community food bank who, seeing my distress, not only gave me extra supplies, but also a flyer for a city program supporting single mothers wanting to start small businesses. That flyer had been the first tiny spark. Now, heading north back towards Portland, back towards my life, I felt not like an outcast, but like a traveler, finally definitively on her own road. The cedar chest beside me wasn't a fortune, but it was something. A piece of a past I hadn't known, a story waiting to be unwrapped. It wasn't the legacy Eleanor Ainsworth had intended, perhaps, but maybe it was the beginning of mine. The moment we crossed the Columbia River back into Portland, it was like a physical weight lifted from my shoulders. The familiar skyline, often softened by a gentle drizzle, felt like a welcoming embrace. Ethan, who had been surprisingly quiet for the last leg of the journey from Sonoma, immediately perked up. "We're home, Mommy. Can we go to Ethan's hearth tomorrow? I miss the volcano fries." I laughed, the sound genuine and light for the first time in days. "You bet, Munchkin. First thing." The next morning, back in my usual spot on SE Division Street, the air alive with the clatter of the early streetcar and the aroma of freshly ground coffee from Blossom and Bean. I felt the last vestiges of Sonoma's chill dissipate. Maria Rodriguez, her dark hair tied back in a colorful bandana, was already at her counter arranging a tray of conchas. She saw me and her face lit up. Ethan, true to his word, had darted over to the food truck, patting its cheerful mural of a smiling volcano, almost like greeting an old friend. "Ava, Ethan, you're back." Maria bustled over, wiping her hands on her apron, and enveloped me in a warm hug that smelled of cinnamon and yeast. "How was it, the family thing?" Her eyes were kind, understanding. She knew enough about my past not to pry, but enough to offer silent support. It was exactly what I expected, Maria, I said, a wry smile playing on my lips. No grand revelations, no fatted calves. But I added a new lightness in my voice. "It's done, and I feel good." Ethan, meanwhile, was already inside Ethan's hearth, checking on things as if he were the head chef. My small but mighty food truck, painted a cheerful eruption orange, was more than just a business. It was a testament to survival, to rebuilding a life from scratch. Portland, with its thriving food scene and supportive community of makers and small business owners, had given me the soil in which to plant my own roots. Our days settled back into a familiar, comforting rhythm. School runs for Ethan, early mornings at the farmer's market sourcing the freshest local ingredients, the happy chaos of the lunch rush, and quiet evenings in our cozy two-bedroom apartment in the Hawthorne district. Old Mr. Marcus Mac Henderson, his face a roadmap of Oregon seasons, continued to be my most reliable supplier of organic vegetables and homespun wisdom. "Heard you went down to wine country, Ava," he said one morning, unloading a crate of vibrant purple kale. "Hope they treated you right?" "They treated me like an Ainsworth Mac," I replied, and he just grunted a sound that conveyed perfect understanding. The cedar chest from great-grandmother Eliza sat in a corner of my living room for a few days, an unopened mystery. I was busy, yes, but if I was honest, I was also a little hesitant. It felt like a tangible link to a past I had worked so hard to move beyond. But Sonoma and the will reading hadn't broken me. Instead, strangely, it had solidified something within me, a quiet affirmation of the path I'd chosen. One rainy Portland evening after Ethan was asleep, I finally found myself drawn to the chest. With a glass of local Pinot Gris beside me, I lifted the lid. The scent of old cedar and something else faint and sweet, perhaps dried lavender, wafted out. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, was not jewelry or silver, but an assortment of antique kitchen tools. Oddly shaped wooden spoons, a delicate copper whisk, a set of intricately carved pastry crimpers, and a small leather-bound notebook. My fingers traced the worn leather cover of the notebook. It was filled with spidery, elegant handwriting, interspersed with charming, if amateurish, sketches of herbs and finished dishes. Recipes, dozens of them. Some familiar like a classic apple pie, others more obscure with names like Sonoma Sunshine Conserve and Valley Herb Focaccia. There were notes scribbled in the margins: "Add more nutmeg," or "Perfect for a cool autumn evening." This wasn't just a collection of recipes. It was a glimpse into the heart of another woman, another Ainsworth who had clearly found joy and solace in the kitchen, much like I did. Eliza, a great-grandmother I'd never known whose passions seemed to echo my own across the generations. I shared my discovery with Maria over coffee the next morning. Look at this, I said, showing her a recipe for a lavender and honey shortbread. It sounds incredible, doesn't it? Maria's eyes lit up. Ava, this is amazing. It's like a secret inheritance. Not money, but something far more precious for a chef like you. You have to try making some of these. Her enthusiasm was infectious. That weekend, I started experimenting. Some of Eliza's techniques were old-fashioned, some ingredients hard to source precisely. My first attempt at her valley herb focaccia was a bit too dense, the Sonoma Sunshine Conserve a tad too tart. Ethan, my ever-willing taste tester, gave his honest 8-year-old critiques. It's okay, Mommy, but your volcano fries are still the best. But with each attempt, I felt a growing connection not just to the recipes, but to Eliza. It wasn't about replicating her dishes perfectly, it was about understanding the spirit behind them, the love of craft. I started to think about how I could adapt them, infuse them with my own style, with the fresh, vibrant ingredients of the Pacific Northwest. An idea began to form. What if I dedicated a week at Ethan's Hearth to these heritage recipes, adapted and reimagined, a Sonoma Legacy Portland Spirit kind of theme? It felt a little risky. My customers were used to my established menu. But the thought excited me. The climax of this quiet, creative period came one afternoon. I'd been working on Eliza's recipe for a spiced apple and pear hand pie using Hood River pears and a touch of cardamom, a spice I loved but wasn't in the original. I tweaked the pastry using a local whole wheat flour Mac Henderson had recommended. As they baked, the aroma filled my tiny apartment, a rich, comforting scent that was both nostalgic and new. When I pulled them from the oven, golden brown and fragrant, Ethan, drawn by the smell, was the first to try one. His eyes widened. "Mommy," he said, his mouth full, This is even better than volcano fries." Coming from him, that was the highest praise imaginable. I took a bite. The pastry was flaky, the filling perfectly balanced between sweet and tart, with a warm, lingering spice. It was more than just a good pie, it was a bridge. A bridge between Sonoma and Portland, between Eliza Ainsworth and Ava Chandler, between a legacy I thought I'd rejected and a future I was actively creating. The success of Heritage Recipe Week did more than just boost sales for Ethan's Hearth. It created a small, warm buzz that rippled through Portland's ever-vibrant food community. I hadn't expected much beyond sharing a few unique dishes and a nice story, but the response had been genuinely heartwarming. So when an email landed in my inbox a week later with the subject line, "Invitation Portland Plate Fest, Emerging Culinary Voices," my heart did a little leap. It was from a Mrs. Davis, the lead organizer for one of the city's largest and most respected street food festivals, an annual event that drew crowds from all over the Pacific Northwest. They were introducing a new category this year, Emerging Culinary Voices, specifically for up-and-coming food trucks and pop-ups, and Ethan's Hearth, thanks to a glowing mention on a popular Portland food blog following my Heritage Week, was invited to apply. The initial thrill quickly gave way to a familiar nod of anxiety. The Portland Plate Fest was a big deal. It wasn't just our friendly neighborhood corner anymore. This was a stage with much brighter lights, significantly more competition, and discerning judges. Could Ethan's Hearth, my little orange beacon of hope and hard work, really hold its own there? Portland was my city now, my chosen home. Ethan's Hearth had its regular spot near a bustling city park, often sharing the air with the scent of roses from the International Rose Test Garden on a clear day. My apartment, though small, was filled with the aroma of whatever new recipe I was testing. But the Plate Fest was usually held downtown in Pioneer Courthouse Square, Portland's living room, a much larger and more intense environment. This would be a significant step up. Ethan, of course, was ecstatic. A festival, Mommy, with tons of people, and you can win a prize. His faith in me was an unwavering force, both a comfort and a pressure. Maria Rodriguez, ever my cheerleader, was already brainstorming ways to temporarily brand the truck for the event. "Think big, Ava. This is your chance," she'd said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Old Mac Henderson more pragmatically just nodded when I told him, "Your food's good, girl. Honest. People will see that. Just make sure you got enough of those fancy hand pies." The fancy hand pies, Eliza Ainsworth's spiced apple and pear creations reborn with Hood River pears, and a touch of my own cardamom-infused magic had become my signature. They were the heart of my application for the Plate Fest. The conflict wasn't about whether I wanted to do it. The opportunity was too good to pass up. The conflict was internal, the familiar whisper of self-doubt, the fear of overreaching, of falling flat on a bigger stage. It was one thing to charm my regulars. It was another entirely to impress seasoned food critics and a festival crowd looking for the next big thing. The application process itself was rigorous menu proposals, a business overview, a personal statement about my culinary philosophy. I poured my heart into it, telling the story of Ethan's hearth, of my journey, and of how Eliza's rediscovered recipes had become a bridge to my own creativity. Then came the waiting. When the acceptance email finally arrived, a wave of elation washed over me quickly, followed by sheer panic. We were in now, the real work began. The weeks leading up to the Plate Fest were a blur of meticulous planning and relentless preparation. I decided my festival menu would center around the heritage hand pies, but I also developed a savory Sonoma Fields tart using Mac's freshest vegetables and a hint of Eliza's herb blend and a refreshing Portland berry sparkler drink. I rented a slightly larger prep space in a shared commercial kitchen in the Central East Side Industrial District for a few days before the event, knowing my tiny apartment kitchen wouldn't cut it for the volume needed. Maria volunteered to manage the counter with me, her infectious energy invaluable. Mac Henderson promised to deliver his produce directly to the festival site. Even Ethan took on the critical role of official banner holder and chief morale booster. The support from my Portland family was immense, a stark contrast to the cold indifference I'd faced in Sonoma. They believed in me, and their belief was contagious. Still, there were moments of near-crippling doubt. One sweltering afternoon in the borrowed kitchen, a batch of pastry dough refused to cooperate, turning into a sticky, unworkable mess. Frustrated and close to tears, I almost threw in the towel. It was Maria who found me slumped over the counter. She didn't say much, just put a comforting hand on my shoulder and started helping me clean up. "Every chef has days like this, Ava," she said gently. "It's not about the fall, it's about how you get back up and re-roll the dough." Her simple wisdom, a hallmark of Portland's unpretentious can-do spirit, was exactly what I needed. The day of the Portland Plate Fest arrived with a mixture of gray clouds and hopeful sunshine. Typical Portland. Pioneer Courthouse Square was a riot of color, sound, and tantalizing aromas. Sleek professional food trucks and elaborately decorated stalls from some of the city's most acclaimed chefs and restaurants lined the square. My little orange Ethan's hearth, even with its new festive banner, looked decidedly homespun in comparison. A fresh wave of nerves hit me. We set up a well-oiled, if slightly frantic machine. The first few hours were a whirlwind. The crowds were immense. The heritage hand pies, their aroma a unique blend of old-world comfort and Pacific Northwest flair, began to draw attention. People were curious, intrigued by the story behind them, which I'd briefly printed on a small chalkboard menu. Then disaster struck. An energy crisis, or rather a lack of electricity. The old generator I relied on for the truck sputtered, coughed, and died right in the middle of the lunch rush, my small oven going dark. My heart plummeted. We had a line of 20 people. For a moment, I froze. This was it. Failure, public and humiliating. Then I saw Ethan's worried face, Maria's look of concern, and something inside me clicked. I wouldn't let this beat me. "Okay, plan B," I announced, perhaps a little too brightly. "Maria, start a list for pre-orders on the cold tarts and sparklers. I'm going to see if anyone has a spare generator or a power outlet we can borrow." I dashed off, weaving through the crowds, my chef's whites already smudged. I approached a neighboring stall, a well-known BBQ joint with a massive rumbling generator. Taking a deep breath, I explained my predicament to their gruff-looking pitmaster. He listened, stroked his beard, then, to my utter astonishment, grunted, "Got a spare outlet on the back. Plug in, just don't blow my system, all right?" Relief so potent it almost buckled, my knees flooded through me. We were back in business. The incident, rather than derailing us, seemed to galvanize our little team. We worked with renewed determination, the camaraderie strong and unwavering. The hand pies flew off the shelves. Later that afternoon, as things finally began to slow, Mrs. Davis, the festival organizer, approached our truck. She was accompanied by two other people I vaguely recognized as local food critics. My stomach did a nervous flip. They'd tasted the hand pie earlier. "Ava Chandler," Mrs. Davis said, a small smile playing on her lips. "Your heritage hand pies have caused quite a stir, and your creative problem-solving with the generator didn't go unnoticed." She paused, and I held my breath. The judges were incredibly impressed, not just with the quality and unique story of your food, but also with your tenacity. It's a pleasure to inform you that Ethan's Hearth has been awarded a special commendation for culinary innovation and resilience. A special commendation. It wasn't the grand prize, but it was something significant, an acknowledgement from the heart of Portland's food scene. Tears welled in my eyes as Ethan let out a whoop of joy, and Maria hugged me tightly. Mac, who had come by to check on us, gave a rare, wide grin. It wasn't just about the award. It was about the journey, about taking those forgotten embers from Eliza Ainsworth's legacy, nurturing them in the supportive soil of Portland, and fanning them into a bright, resilient flame of my own. The special commendation from the Portland Plate Fest acted like a turbocharge for Ethan's Hearth. Within weeks, a feature article appeared in the Portland Mercury, complete with a wonderfully candid photo of Ethan beaming beside me, both of us dusted with flour. The headline read, "From Sonoma Ashes, a Portland Phoenix Ava Chandler and the Reinvented Legacy of Ethan's Hearth." It was a little dramatic, perhaps, but it captured the spirit of my journey. Suddenly, my little orange food truck wasn't just a local favorite. It was a story, a destination. The lines grew longer, the catering requests more frequent, and for the first time I allowed myself to dream a little bigger than the confines of my mobile kitchen. A year flew by in a whirlwind of hard work, creative bursts, and the quiet joy of watching Ethan thrive. Portland, true to its supportive nature, had embraced us fully. We were no longer just surviving, we were flourishing. The cedar chest from great-grandmother Eliza, once a symbol of a complicated past, now sat in a place of honor in our small living room, its contents having sparked so much more than just new recipes. It had sparked a new understanding of heritage, not as something to be passively received, but actively shaped. The biggest change came in the form of a small, charming storefront in the Kearns neighborhood, a space I'd tentatively leased with a small business loan, and the enthusiastic, if slightly nerve-wracking encouragement of a local angel investor who'd fallen in love with our story and my heritage hand pies at the festival. We called it the Hearth by Ava, a natural extension of the food truck, but with a cozy seating area, a proper kitchen, and a small retail corner where I sold some of Eliza's inspired jams and baked goods. Maria Rodriguez's Blossom and Bean supplied our desserts, and Mac Henderson's produce was as always prominently featured. I'd even managed to hire 2 part-time staff, a culinary student named Leo, who was eager to learn, and a warm, capable woman named Sarah, who handled the front of house. Ethan, now a lanky 9-year-old, had officially promoted himself to junior menu consultant and chief cookie tester. He'd spend afternoons after school doing his homework at a corner table, occasionally piping up with surprisingly astute observations about a new dish. He was happy, grounded, and incredibly proud of his hearth. One crisp October evening, the city of Portland was hosting its annual PDX Innovate Awards, an event celebrating local entrepreneurs and small businesses making a significant impact. To my utter astonishment, the Hearth by Ava was nominated in the Rising Star Food and Beverage category. The thought of attending another award ceremony still gave me a flutter of nerves, but this time it was different. This wasn't about seeking validation from a past that had rejected me. This was about celebrating a present I had built with my own 2 hands, surrounded by a community that felt like true family. The ceremony was held at the Portland Art Museum, a far cry from the formal stiffness of the Ainsworth Library. The atmosphere was buzzing, a vibrant mix of artists, tech innovators, and passionate small business owners. Maria and Mac were there, beaming like proud parents. Ethan, looking dapper in a tiny bow tie I'd found for him, sat beside me, vibrating with excitement. When our category was announced and the Hearth by Ava was declared the winner, the applause felt genuinely warm, a wave of goodwill from the city that had become our haven. Walking onto the stage this time, I didn't feel the need for a carefully crafted statement of defiance. Instead, looking out at the sea of supportive faces at Ethan, whose smile threatened to split his face at Maria wiping a tear from her eye, my voice, when I finally found it, was thick with emotion. "Thank you." I began, the simple words carrying the weight of 1,000 grateful moments. When I first came to Portland with my son, I was just looking for a place to start over. I never dreamed that this city and its incredible people would give us so much more than that: a home, a community, and the chance to build something meaningful from a very simple idea: good food made with love, shared with friends. I spoke of Eliza's unexpected gift, not the monetary kind, but the gift of connection to a forgotten passion. I thanked Maria Mack, my small team, and the loyal customers who had become our extended family. And finally, I thanked Ethan, this hearth. I said, my gaze finding his, was always for you. You are my brightest flame. Later that evening, after a small joyous celebration with our closest friends at the Hearth by Ava, a spontaneous potluck of sorts as everyone brought something to share, I found myself standing alone for a moment by the large front window of the cafe. The award, a beautifully crafted piece of local art, sat on the counter. Outside, the lights of Portland glowed invitingly. A stray email had found its way to me a few weeks prior, forwarded by the old family solicitor. It was a clipped, almost perfunctory note from Aunt Caroline mentioning she'd seen an online article about my little food venture in Portland and wishing me continued modest success. There was no warmth, no real acknowledgement, but for the first time it didn't sting. It simply didn't matter. Her world of sprawling vineyards and dynastic expectations felt 1,000,000 miles away, a faded photograph from a life I no longer recognized as my own. My success wasn't modest, not to me. It was monumental, built on a foundation of resilience, creativity, and the unwavering support of a community that valued authenticity over pedigree. Ethan came to stand beside me, slipping his small hand into mine. "Best night ever, Mom," he whispered, leaning his head against my arm. I squeezed his hand, my heart full. "Me too, Munchkin, me too." The legacy of Eleanor Ainsworth was one of land and lineage, of a carefully curated empire. My legacy, the one I was building day by day in this vibrant, quirky city, was different. It was in the taste of a perfectly baked hand pie and the laughter shared over a communal table, in the warmth of a community that had taken us in and called us their own. It was in the proud sparkle in my son's eyes. I had taken the embers from a past that could have consumed me, and with a little help from my friends and a whole lot of heart, fanned them into a bright, enduring flame. This was my hearth, my home, my legacy. And it was more than enough. Ava Chandler didn't inherit an empire. She inherited a chest of wooden spoons, old pastry cutters, and a whisper of memory from a woman she never met. And with that, she built a future. She didn't find her legacy in a marble-floored wine estate or in the cold precision of old money tradition. She found it in laughter over hand pies, in flour-dusted aprons and borrowed generators, in a food truck that became a heartbeat, and in a son who looked at her with joy and called it home. Because legacy isn't about what you're given, it's about what you create with your hands, with your courage, and with the people who show up when it matters. Have you ever had to step away from what was expected of you just to step into who you really are? Have you ever built something out of love when no one else believed in the dream? But you, share your story in the comments, because someone out there may be standing at the same crossroads, and your words might be the sign they've been looking for. And if Ava's journey stirred something inside you, if you've ever felt torn between obligation and freedom, between the weight of the past and the fire of your own voice, follow this channel. Here we don't chase perfection. We tell stories about becoming, about quiet strength, about the brave people who rise not because it's easy, but because they know they're worth it. You belong here. Your voice matters, and your legacy, it starts exactly where you are.